Okay. All right, class. We did leave off on the sexism topic right before the tape cut off. So what I wrote down there was an example of sexism is almost every female and male relationship in the house on Mango Street. The reason why I say that is because it starts with the great grandmother, um, and it ends with up to now with Esperanza. So obviously, women don't have a choice back in the day, so that's why she was into the forced marriage. We discussed that previously. We see that women are expected to be almost submissive to the men in the society that Esperanza lives in, and they're looked at as not so womanly because they stand up to men, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, it's pretty sexist, to be honest. As far as the relationships are concerned, I put that relationships are toxic in both texts, and I can explain that because of what we talked about previously. We see that Sally is abused by her father, and the other women are not allowed to leave their homes, and that's actually pretty toxic, and it's kind of abusive as well because maybe you're not hitting them, but you're trapping them, and they're expected to spend their lives in isolation, and they can't do anything without asking for permission, and that kind of life is a quality is not up to par with what we are accustomed to today. Um, and that can be very toxic for somebody. Now going to Sally, obviously her relationship with Mister is beyond toxic. I mean, he rapes her, and her relationship with her stepfather at the beginning of the book as well. He sexually abuses her, and then they have two children, and she's never allowed to see them or hear from them. Um, and going back to Mister, I mean, he hides the letters from her sister for years, and he makes her believe that she didn't write to them, and that's extremely psychological abuse. Um, there's no other way to put it. He pretty much makes her just focus on him, and he resents her for not being more like Shug and the person that he likes, and it's just crazy. Anytime that she tries to do anything for herself, he beats on her, and he sexually assaults her and stuff. And obviously that's extremely toxic. Even in, for example, um, Sophia, her relationship with her husband, um, we see the toxicity of the relationships because he asks Mister what he should do because Sophia is super independent and she can stand up to him, and he says that, oh well, you should strike her to control her a little bit better. And when he asks Sally the same thing, she says, yeah, maybe you should strike her, and that would help with the controlling. So obviously she's accustomed to the abuse. She's used to it, almost like a brainwashing kind of thing. She actually advises a man to hit a woman because of the because that's what she's used to. That's how they control her. So she advises him to hit his wife, and so he does, and Sophie ends up leaving. So obviously not a good advice there, but it definitely does highlight the toxicity of the relationships, and it lets us as readers and viewers see that these are not exactly the kinds of things that you want to be around. And so obviously we see that Sally just holds up resentment until the very end, and she finally explodes and goes off on Mister, and she's reborn in a sense because she finally has some pride and some dignity there, and her rebirth is her biggest triumph. And obviously we see that in the house on Mango Street, Esperanza wants to leave because of all the negativity and the stereotypes of the women that she's around. Like obviously their roles are not desirable, so she wants to leave and become her own woman and form her own road, and that's very important. So now we can go ahead and discuss different types of abuse and the effects that it has on the characters in the texts. Um, and we can start with Sally actually, because Sally obviously she is abused at the beginning of the book by her, which she believed was her father. It turns out he was her stepfather later, but that's not here nor there. Um, and this pretty much damages her for the entire book. I mean, she goes off and she's shipped with Mister, and he abuses her and beats her, and she's not. She doesn't have any power. She doesn't have any power for herself. Um, um, she's unwilling and unable to confront any kind of abuse. And like I said, she is so accustomed to the abuse that she advises Harpo to beat Sophia to gain control. Obviously, this is not a good thing. This is as a result of the abuse that she's endured her whole life. She knows nothing else other than abuse for control. Obviously, she finally breaks the chains of her oppression when she's reborn, if you want to call it that. But it obviously has a really negative effect on her up until the very end of the book, where she just doesn't know what love is. And once she finally gets a little bit of it, it's the best thing, and the story takes a much more positive avenue there. Now, as far as the house on Mango Street, Esperanza unfortunately is. I mean, it's implied that she's raped. She's definitely physically assaulted, and that's not okay either. And she blames women initially at first because they didn't warn her about it, and Sally was the one that left her to pursue the attention of a boy. So there is definitely some resentment there, but obviously we know that it wasn't necessarily Sally's fault. It's obviously the fault of the abuser, and maybe Esperanza didn't realize it then because she was enraged at Sally, but it definitely motivates her to use that it's another thing to overcome, and they do so. That's the theme of both of these women. They use these things to overcome adversity, and they make themselves so much better than they were before the tragic events happened. And so there's definitely different types of abuse here, whether it's physical or sexual or psychological, but in the end these women overcome and they make themselves better, and that's always a good thing. So finally, we're going to compare and contrast the main characters, Esperanza and Celi, and the plots of the events in the text. Okay, so finally we are going to compare and contrast. So to get into this, the biggest comparison I saw was actually the way that women influence the main characters in the text. An example of this is Celi in The Color Purple. She is in awe when she meets Sophia because she's so strong-willed, and she is able to demand from her husband, and she has power, and she has a certain level of independence. And then she meets Shug Avery, who can, I mean, she's the only woman she sees that can control Mister, that she can stand up to him. Obviously, Mister is in love with this lady, so that kind of lends a little bit of help. But we see that Celi almost looks up to these women because that's pretty much what she might want for herself. And these women inspire her, and at the very end, when Shug helps her find the letters that Mister was hiding from Nettie, she snaps. So, excuse me. There it is. So when she finds the hidden letters, she snaps, and this is where her climax happens, because she finally has enough courage to stand up to Mister, and she leaves him and she goes to Tennessee. And obviously all of this is with the help of Shug, and with the help of these women. Obviously Sophia is imprisoned in the text, and she kind of loses her mojo, if you will. But seeing Celi stand up to Mister gives her that powerful nature that she once had. It gives it right back to her. So it's definitely an empowering moment. It's a very good moment for the women. They're super strong in the text, and they're portrayed that way in the movie as well. And that's the way that the women influence Celi. It's almost the opposite in The House on Mango Street, because we see Esperanza doesn't like the house they live in at the beginning. She's kind of embarrassed. It's not what she envisions. She doesn't like her name because her great-grandmother had it and she was in a forced marriage, and she wants to change her name. And then we see Sally, who has an abusive father. And then we have the other women who have husbands that won't let them go out, and that they keep them hidden because they're too beautiful. And all of this works to show Esperanza what she doesn't want, rather than the women showing her what they could be. They show her exactly what she doesn't want to be in her life. So she uses that rather than to um, motivate her to be like them. It's to be the opposite, and that's obviously a good thing. She uses that to influence her writing, and that's her motivation to get out of Mango Street, because she doesn't want to be another trapped woman, another statistic, if you will. And she's empowered though, because she's empowered by promising them that she won't forget them and that she'll come back for all the trapped women who cannot help themselves. And that's also very, very important, because that shows that she's very caring. And as far as the character comparisons, they're very similar in the sense that they both long for something throughout their texts. Sally longs for courage, and Esperanza longs for something different in her life. And obviously, she didn't know it then, but the writing is what's gonna propel her to the next level and allow her to leave Mango Street. Um, that's the big difference. The difference to me is how they use women to to use them to motivate them and to inspire them. While one of them uses them to inspire, the other one uses them to as fuel to get away from that kind of environment that she's in. And the plots, um, obviously the plots are similar. They both have very oppressive natures, whether it's to Sally or to the people around her, and like Esperanza as well. They're kind of oppressive, but it also has moments of um, growth and learning and love. And the big theme in both is overcoming all the abuse and all the negative surroundings that they're involved in, and all the bad things that happen to them in their respective texts. Both women are incredibly powerful, and they overcome, and they make something better out of their lives, and that's what it's all about. And that was the end for me. Thank you guys for your time. I hope you found something useful. I hope you learned something, and have a good one.